Well done, Jordan.
Hey, friends, this is Dan and Stephanie Burke. You're watching Behind the Scenes Divine Intimacy Radio. In a minute, we're going to be talking about demons. Now, titling the show is, what did you title the show, Jordan?
The,
Spiritual Warfare in Modern Times. Okay.
oh, thank you for the reminder.
Um, so, in a few minutes, we'll be talking to Super Paul McCusker about spiritual warfare in modern times. Before we do that, I want to tell you about a webinar we have coming up. Jump into the deep, preparing for Lent. It's tomorrow. Tomorrow, 2 days from now,
February 1st?
February 2nd.
Okay.
And Dan Burke. Oh, I'm doing that webinar.
Oh, nice.
I didn't know that. Claire Dwyer is going to be there as well. She's going to be the co-host. And we are going to be talking about how to have a completely different spiritual progress this year, in particular through Lent. And we have a special announcement that you're not going to want to miss because it's pretty exciting for us and for you and for the blessings you'll receive through it. So February 2nd, you can find that out at SpiritualDirection.com events. And I think we're full up on the next two pilgrimages. So how about the Divine Intimacy Radio retreat?
I mean Divine Intimacy and Marriage. If they want to sign up, they still can.
There's a few seats left there.
Yeah. Just a few, because we're almost full.
Yeah, it's the biggest one we've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. It's worth going, even if you don't listen to us, just to go see.
No, it's an awesome retreat. Listen to our prior commercials about it.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and start the show? On your mark, get set, go. This is Dan and Stephanie Burke. Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest.
Your hermitage of the heart.
Your monastery of the mind, where we lift our hearts and minds to heaven to draw on the wisdom of the saints to help us to navigate this difficult life. And today we have a very good friend. He's in our, top 5, right?
Well, he has, he had the distinct role of actually reading at our wedding.
He did read. That's right. He did read at our wedding.
So not everybody gets to read at our wedding. That was a long time
There was
ago.
only 2 people who read at our wedding. Yeah. Okay.
So we're really happy to have Paul McCusker with us.
Yeah.
He is a writer, a dramatist.
Wait, no, that's wrong. He is a prolific writer.
So Paul McCusker is a prolific writer and a dramatist. He's best known for his work on the long-running children's audio program, Adventures in Odyssey, the award-winning radio theater productions for the Augustine Institute.
They are amazing. You got to check those out.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. And Focus on the Family, and a variety of novels, a long list of variety of novels, written for all ages, including Into the Catacombs, Last Things, The Adventures of Nick and Sam, and the Virtue Chronicles. And he's a dear friend.
Yeah. Welcome, Paul.
It's good to be with you. Always a pleasure.
It's just sitting here and listening to your bio reminds me, Paul and I both became Catholic while working for one of the most influential Protestant organizations of its time, Focus on the Family.
Yeah, I don't know what that says about them, but that's interesting.
It is interesting. I think it made a good bit of people in the organization uncomfortable. Some didn't care, but some did.
Yeah, it was interesting when I became Catholic. I think the question I got, to be honest, was first. I think the reaction was, so I think they felt as long as it doesn't interfere with your work, that's good.
Right.
And then the other was, oh, that's just Paul doing his high church bells and smells thing, because I was Anglican.
Yeah,
and then the final thing was, my immediate boss, when I told him, just said, "So, do you love Jesus?" And I said, "Well, more than ever." And he said, "Okay, that's all we need to know. Let's move on." And that was kind of it.
For me, it was a little more difficult, not much, but the statement of faith of Focus on the Family was actually anti-Catholic. It was written by evangelicals for financial accountability or something like that.
Right.
And they were Calvinist, leaning anti-Catholic. And so I went and met with the Bishop Sheridan, God rest his soul, and walked through the statement to figure out if I could sign it or I could still agree to it. And so then I met with Ron Wilson, who was at that time head of human resources. And I said, I'm going to read for you the statement of faith, and I'm going to tell you what I'm agreeing to. And he said, okay. So then we just kept moving.
And I didn't actually have to sign it. I'd been on and off staff. And I think during that period, I had come back on staff and they never made me sign it. But since then, by the way, there's been an interesting debate going on, because a couple of Catholics worked there and noticed especially this first point on the statement of faith and said they could not sign it.
Yeah.
And then the organization had to go through and decide. And I think they decided to either ignore it, but they wouldn't change the offending clauses. So
yeah.
But that's the way things are.
Well, okay. Good. Well, let's talk about our subject today. So I will say that I think the work you did on the annotated Screwtape letters is extremely helpful and good. In fact, I use the book it's a required reading for my Spiritual Warfare and Discernment of Spirits course, to give them a holy imagination. But let's lay the groundwork for folks who maybe aren't familiar with C.S. Lewis, and what is this Screwtape Letters thing, and why is it so powerful and important?
Well, I think C.S. Lewis is about as close as you can get to, I think, a Protestant saint. There are only a couple of them, but he was a scholar in mid-20th century, had a long journey to the faith because he was primarily agnostic. In fact, as a young man, I was tickled by the fact that he resented God for not existing. Period. And
classic atheist problem.
But he ultimately in this long journey, it was not one of those immediate conversions. He came to Christ, and then he took on in his writing duties more so than anything. He had a passion for apologetics, and he began to write, if not overt material about the faith and defending the faith, but certainly imaginative things. He did the Space Trilogy. He did tons and tons of writing, The Great Divorce, which a lot of people read and love, and which almost advocates a view of purgatory. Which
it does, yeah.
And of course, he's best known for the Chronicles of Narnia. And but mixed in within all of that, he was bored during church one day, and during the homily, he got this idea about an exchange of letters between a demon and a subordinate demon, and how demons do what they do to wreck our lives, to wreck our spirituality, to completely thwart our journey to heaven. And that seed of an idea kind of grew into what then became a series of letters for one of the English newspapers. It was a Church of England newspaper called The Guardian. And for 33 weeks, he just did every week these letters from Screwtape, the senior demon, to his nephew, Wormwood. And through each one, he was exploring all the different facets of essentially temptation and what he would have said is a world turned upside down. Because the whole thing is from the point of view of the demon. And so that means it's not necessarily accurate, but it's only accurate because it gives us an inside look at the workings of demons. In fact, what I'd like to do in the course that I'm going to do is tie a lot of what he's talking about into with The Devil in the Castle. Because what you write about there ties into a lot of the things that Screwtape is talking about in all the different ways he tempts us. And a lot of it's through psychological games. So that's what the book does. And it's become a classic because it's so very insightful.
So what we're talking about then is that you're going to be doing a course at the Avila Institute, utilizing your writing of or your annotated version of the Screwtape
Letters.
Oh, hello. It's early, I guess. It's Screwtape Letters.
Yeah.
And then utilizing Dan's book, Devil in the Castle. So
Well, I'd like to draw the parallels because Lewis
Sure.
doesn't. I mean, Lewis was not Catholic. I know he read the saints, but the degree to which he integrated their works into his writings is just very loose, rarely direct. I know you can sense the influence, but I know, for example, I went digging into some of his letters, and he quotes Sister Teresa, Saint Teresa of Avila, in a couple of places, but by no means did I get the sense that he had really jumped deep into her writings and an understanding of her.
You know what's fascinating about Lewis and Screwtape is, so Stephanie and I have been in many exorcisms, full rite exorcisms, and then of course ongoing deliverance ministry, which Stephanie is head of for the Apostolate Via community. And what's striking about Lewis is, without having that kind of experience, how accurate he is in the way in depicting the way demons behave, because we get to see it in a sense firsthand. And then when you're in deliverance world, your sensitivities are heightened, and you can be in an exorcism and hear a demon say a lie over and over, and then be out in the world and hear a friend or a student or somebody say the exact same lie in the exact same way, and you have this heightened sensitivity to all of the demonic activity going on, which rarely people get a glimpse into. So I think what's invaluable about his work is that he helps us to develop what I would call a holy imagination that helps us to understand the doctrinal truths in a deeper conceptual way. Does that make sense?
It does, and you're right. I think through Narnia, through a lot of his writings, the holy imagination, we underestimate that. I think is believed very often. We think of stories, we think of inspirational things as secondary or somewhere down the list of things we ought to engage in. And with him, he brings it to the forefront. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of how he does that.
Yeah, the power of holy imagination is, as you say, way underrated. In our high calling program, we have about 100 guys that we're doing priestly formation for and preparing them for seminary. We actually take them through Lord of the Rings. Dr. Andrew Seeley, I think, is the one who's teaching that. And the reason we're doing it is to elicit a deeper kind of visceral connection to what it means to be a hero, what it means to be courageous, what it means to be valiant, and exhibit virtues even to total self-sacrifice, which of course is perfectly exemplified in Jesus, but also the priesthood, for a priest to be holy. So I think it's underrated and it's unfortunate, but it's for those who allow themselves to, imbibe, if you will, I don't know if that's the right word, to drink of it, to internalize it. It has a similar effect. We just led a pilgrimage to Israel this summer. It has a similar effect to pilgrimages to Israel, where instead of these vague conceptions of where Jesus walked and when he went to Jericho and when he was in Jerusalem, when he's instead of these vague conceptions, suddenly now everything goes 3D. We're actually in the place, we're experiencing it. So it's almost like the power of meditation, Ignatian meditation of Scripture, in the sense that it brings it all alive. So when we get back from the break, we'll continue to talk to Paul McCusker, who'll be teaching a course at the Avila Institute on spiritual warfare in modern times, C.S. Lewis and the Screwtape Letters. It starts Thursday, March 9th. So go to avila-institute.org and check that out, avila-institute.org, and we'll be right back. Okay, you ready for the next one? All right. Mark and said, go. This is Dan and Stephanie Burke. Welcome back to Divine Intimacy Radio. We're here with a really incredibly gifted writer, content creator, audio dramas, multiple books, and we're just so blessed to have him just as a friend, a good friend, but also teaching for us at the Avila Institute. As I mentioned before the break, he'll be teaching a course coming up here pretty quickly. So you can go out on spiritual warfare in modern times, head out to avila-institute.org. And even if you hear this broadcast some ways down the line and it's sort of out of sync with when the course is available, you can always become a member of the Avila Army, which is a monthly support of our work. And then you'll be able to find Paul's course in there, but it's always more fun live. So if you can do that, check it out, avila-institute.org. Stephanie, you had a question.
I do. And so I'm going to get personal here, Paul, because I can. So given that the Screwtape Letters, and I think most people that have listened to it, especially if they are able to listen to the dramatized version that you made, that was incredible. I mean, just
off the charts,
best thing ever.
Yeah.
If you want the Screwtape Letters to come alive. So given that when you listen to them, you being, universal, I know that most people listen to it and go, wow, that's just so true. Oh my gosh, I've experienced that. Oh, that's how he works in me. Or, oh, I've seen that in, X person or whatever. You start to understand that really this feels like an inspired work. Given all that, I want to know, how has working with this, teaching with it, getting so deep into this material affected your faith journey?
Well, I think the short answer is it makes it all the more real. I mean, I don't know that there was ever a point where I doubted the existence of demons and their work. The subtleties and nuance is of what they do, I think, is what comes through in Screwtape Letters and then impacts me, because the mind games, the kinds of things, the rationalizations that I might be inclined to do that can lead me into sin or lead me into, or sometimes it's just distraction. And you guys touch on this, but distracting is a big part of it. It's not always the overt sin. It's not always the overt thing. In fact, Screwtape says at one point, why lead them into something like that when you can actually take them in another direction they're not expecting, by way of distraction during prayer, by way of distraction just from doing the right thing at the moment then that we're supposed to do the right thing. And I think I've found that I'm more aware of not the overt ways, but the subtle ways that demons work and tempt and distract us from what we're supposed to be thinking about and what we're supposed to be doing. And Lewis had the same problem, by the way. Lewis considered the Screwtape Letters probably the most unpleasant thing he ever had to write.
Really? That's fascinating.
And he said so. I think he used the quote, it was all thirst, grit, dust, and itch. And he said it was hard because he had to really dive deep into his own spiritual life in order to kind of dig out these nuggets of truth. And during this period, it impacted him so much that he wound up going to a Catholic spiritual director.
Oh, fascinating.
And began to meet with one regularly, and I think did almost for most of the rest of his life. But it was true. He knew his need, and he knew that he was beyond his own powers to deal with these things that he was writing about. And I think it's impacted me much the same way. If ever you think you have a need for a spiritual director, you need help.
Yeah.
Confessional, wherever you can get that, something like this will highlight it because of all the games Satan and his minions are playing with us.
Absolutely. So given that he went to a Catholic spiritual director, do you think he would have become Catholic? I mean, what kept him from going over that last step?
I think his background, I agree with Joseph Pierce, who did a book about this. And his conclusion was that ultimately, in the space of time that we have with Lewis up until 1963, in his letters, you see a lot of his Ulster Irish Protestant background coming up. In fact, I'll give you an example. When I was trying to find references in his letters about St. Teresa, he quotes her at one point. But then there's another point where I stumbled onto another section where a Catholic publisher had picked up one of his books, Pilgrim's Regress. It had fallen out of print with his first publisher, and the Sheet and Ward decided to publish it. And he was having a real problem with this papist publisher publishing his book, but he sort of shrugged and said, well, at least it's out there, that sort of thing. And all the way through, there was a point in one letter where he had met with the Catholic spiritual director, who I guess had pushed him a little bit across a line, whatever that line was, that he just couldn't go in terms of his personal devotions. And he doesn't specify what that is. But whatever it was, you get the impression it was a very Catholic spiritual thing to do. And he actually said, and I told him I would not do it. And if he insisted on it, then I would no longer see him. So there was this line that Lewis kind of brushed up against, like you'd see him touch on it in Mere Christianity and other works, and then he backs off. So I don't know if he had stayed in. Some argue he would. I'm not convinced that he ever would have.
Yeah, I mean, the anti-Catholic sentiment in the culture he grew up in was very, very strong. But what is fascinating, I think, he's a man who was saved by truth and had a passion for truth wherever it led him. And so he seemed that always seemed to lead him brushing up, as you would say, against Catholicism. I think the Great Divorce is one of the more powerful ways of understanding purgatory from a guy who didn't have that in his theological dictionary.
Well, and it's so funny because, I mean, a high church Anglicanism, is apart from being out of communion with Rome, was very Catholic. And Lewis was fascinating because, he would, I think inevitably, if you're going to pursue the deeper spiritualities, you're going to come up against Catholic thought.
Yeah,
and I think that's what constantly happened to him, to whatever degree he realized it or not.
Yeah. So I see on the list of projects that you're working on that there's one that's very close to my heart that I have a deep devotion to, and that's Joan of Arc. So can you talk to us a little bit about this new audio drama that you're working on?
We've been wanting to do this for a long time, and because of COVID, we just couldn't get back to England because we record our actors in England, and so our production shut down. But finally, I had the opportunity to go in, dig into her life, create a drama around her, which really does tell pretty much her story, at least from the point when she goes to meet the Dauphin, the Prince of France, and all the way through to the end. No spoilers here, but and as usual, when I work on these saint dramas, I learn an awful lot. I mean, I come in with just that superficial novel that everybody knows. And then when I start digging in to figure her out as a character, I'm trying to think through how do I present her, and I have to go in pretty deep. It tells me a lot about her. She was amazing. And through the whole thing, I kept going back. She is younger than my daughter.
Isn't it crazy?
My daughter is now 21. But as I was working on this, you're talking about a 17, 18-year-old doing these amazing things.
The thing that's fascinating to me is that Mark Twain's opus, which most people don't know, was about Joan of Arc. How much of his work do you use? How do you find it credible in your research?
Well, I think he researched it. His research was very good. I actually referenced a dozen different books. So I used his. I looked at other novels just to see what they did. I went back. I mean, her trial was one of the most I think the most documented trial of its time. You had transcripts galore of every question, every answer, and you can piece together her life from a lot of, and they had two trials. One was the original one, and then 20 years later or so after her death, then they reopened it because she had been officially declared a witch. And there were enough people advocating that the Vatican then reopened the whole thing and said, well, we're going to do this all over again. And then they came to the opposite conclusion, which was she was not. And it was all a lot of politics around her. But she was not canonized until 1920, I think it was.
So I know folks are listening and thinking that Paul is a very interesting human, and they would be right. He is very interesting. He's got a lot of obscure knowledge and even helpful knowledge. And I think that if you want to dig into some of the best insight into spiritual warfare and actually gain a kind of instinct that Stephanie and I have from direct work in exorcism and deliverance, so that you can better see the movements of the enemy
in your own
life. I think there's 3 resources. We've mentioned them all here today, but one is Paul's course at the Avila Institute, Spiritual Warfare in Modern Times, avila-institute.org. You can become a member also of the Avila Army, which you can get recordings, but I'd recommend the live course. The second is Paul mentioned the use of my most recent book, Devil in the Castle, which is subtitled St. Teresa of Avila, Spiritual Warfare and the Progress of the Soul. And then the third is Spiritual Warfare and Discernment of Spirits. Of course, the book, the annotated Screwtape Letters is a no-brainer. But Spiritual Warfare and Discernment of Spirits, you can find those books at EWTN's religious catalog, the last 2 anyway, or through SpiritualDirection.com. We have a shop button there, and you can find the books there. But either way, I'd strongly recommend. Paul is a good man. He's a fascinating teacher, and the students love his course. And it will help you really to better understand how the enemy works and how you can grow and how you can combat his works in your own life and then help others to do the same. So head out to avila-institute.org, sign up for that course or for the Avila Army so that you can have access to a recording at some point later. Paul, it's been really good to see your face and to
Likewise.
talk with you, and we're grateful that you're teaching for us at the Avila Institute. And with that, we've got to hit the road. One last thing, paulmccusker.com, paulmccusker.com. Stephanie, take us out.
Okay. Until next time, may the God of peace make you perfect in holiness. May he preserve you whole and entire, spirit, soul, and body, irreproachable at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.